Well, thanks, Nikki. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back at the Centre for London for the London conference. We gather this morning just over a month before what will be a momentous general election, the outcome of which will have a massive impact on London and our future. You know, there's a real possibility that we could be about to get the fourth Prime Minister during my time as Mayor. And I'm only in my first term. Not to mention the fifth Home Secretary or the sixth or seventh Minister for Housing. I've literally started to lose count. I look back nostalgically at the time of a strong and stable government. You know, I remember when I came to this conference last year. Brexit was dominating the headlines, with commentators frantically speculating about the many possible outcomes. We had a Prime Minister clearly out of their depth. So 1 year on, it's good to see things have moved on. But seriously, I want to begin by paying tribute to everyone involved with the Centre for London. The Centre for London's making a real impact, not only in terms of influencing the debate, but in shaping the approach taken by policymakers to the challenges facing our city. So please, let's show them our appreciation of all the work they do. It feels like we've come to a crossroads as a country. After years of turmoil, upheaval and uncertainty in our politics, we finally reached a crunch point. The result of the general election will set the path for our country's future and in many ways determine who we are as a nation and as a people for decades to come. I believe there are three core issues at stake, all of which could have a profound impact on London, on our place in the world, and on the ability of cities like London to shape our own future. The first issue is whether we want to remain an open and internationalist country, flourishing by trading and engaging with our closest neighbours as well as the rest of the world, or whether we decide to turn our focus inwards and close ourselves off to people and partnerships beyond our borders. The second issue on the line is the very nature of our economic system and model of governance. Do we want to be a European-style social democracy, or do we want a different path, where we have reduced employment rights, lower public spending, weaker environmental protections, and a greater role for private companies in our NHS? Essentially, a smaller state with lower taxes and fewer regulations that is, for all intent and purposes, a tax haven off the coast of Europe. And the third issue is about the very values that define us as a country going forwards. Will we remain an open, welcoming and sympathetic place for everyone, a place that gave me the opportunities to go from a council estate to becoming Mayor of London? Or is our future something very different, a society that's more closed-minded and hostile to diversity and difference? The answer to these questions, these three questions, and the direction we choose to take in 37 days' time matters for London. Let me start with internationalism and our openness to the world. Global trade and immigration have been an integral part of London's success story. If we're to continue to thrive as a modern global city, we must remain, in my view, open and welcoming to those who've played such a crucial role in our growth and development. We simply can't afford to turn our backs on those who want to come to London to live, study, or work, or those who want to deepen the economic and trade connections that have helped to bind us together with other nations. As the son of Pakistani immigrants who came to this country to build a better life for themselves and their children, London's internationalism is deeply personal to me. I've seen how London simply wouldn't be London without the migrant communities that have contributed so much, from music, fashion and food, to the businesses that power our economy and the public services that serve our communities. But there's no doubt that the extreme Brexit that Boris Johnson wants, combined with the government's immigration plans, would not only do huge damage to our economy, but to the very fabric of our communities. Of course, we need a well-managed, fair immigration system with secure borders, but we also need a system that makes it easier, not harder, to bring people in from outside our country who can help grow our economy. And that's why, if we do end up leaving the EU with a bad deal, I'll immediately step up with my demands for London to have a real say over immigration and visas. But this general election is about much more than how we approach immigration and how we engage with the rest of the world. It's a fundamental question of what form of economic system we want and the future relationship between state and society. With the type of post-Brexit economy and politics espoused by Boris Johnson and many of the leading Brexit supporters, we could end up with a much smaller economy and less money available for public services. And this would inevitably lead to a further hollowing out of the state, something that would only compound the devastating impact of a decade of austerity and lead to even greater levels of poverty, inequality and violent crime across the country, including London. Our vision for the future must be so much more than styling London as some kind of Singapore on the Thames. Rather than solving the major challenges we face, a move to neglect industry and create a low-tax economy that relies solely on a deregulated financial sector would only serve to exacerbate them, concentrating wealth at the top, widening regional disparities, and making it harder to tackle the conditions that have fueled the nativist populism in recent years. What London needs is the exact opposite of this narrow approach that would only benefit a narrow section of our society. London needs a government that puts social justice at the top of the agenda, not the bottom, with a plan to tackle the unacceptable levels of inequality and deprivation that Ben touched on. London needs a government that understands that proper investment in our public services, along with a transformative Green New Deal, is not just the right thing to do, but key to creating a fairer, more equal and safer place for us all. And London needs a government that commits to greater devolution to London, as well as other cities and regions across the country. This last point, the need for proper devolution, is absolutely critical to London's future. I'm proud of what we delivered in London since 2016 with the limited powers and funding we have. This includes the boldest action of any city in the world to tackle air pollution and climate change. It includes laying the foundations to fix London's housing crisis, starting more council homes last year than in any year since 1984. Starting more genuinely affordable homes last year and the year before than in any year since City Hall took control of housing investment, and giving residents the right to vote on estate regeneration plans. It includes making transport more affordable, freezing TfL fares for 3 years in a row, introducing the unlimited hopper bus fare, and getting the night tube and night overground up and running. And it includes creating new opportunities for young Londoners to fulfil their potential and avoid getting involved in crime through the Young Londoners Fund. So yes, we've made great strides, but I know we could be doing so much more if we had the necessary powers and funding. And that's why the political context we inherit after this general election will either continue to tie our hands as London politicians and policymakers, making it much harder for us to build a fairer, safer and greener city we all want, or it could finally set us free, enabling us to get the resources, funding and support we need to tackle the big challenges of our time. Lastly, the third issue at stake is the very values that define us as a country and as the capital city. I'm so proud that in London, we don't just tolerate our differences, we respect, embrace, and celebrate them. But for the first time in my lifetime, I fear that the social progress we've made is not only stalling, but at risk of going backwards. We've seen how hate crime is on the rise. The country is more divided than ever before, and the far right is on the march once again. All of this is threatening our hard-won rights and freedoms and the values that come to define us as a liberal democratic society. Depressingly, more politicians, even at the top of this government, have been following the footsteps of Trump and Farage by exploiting the politics of blame, trying to pit their own citizens against one another. Britain and London deserve so much more and so much better than this. That's why I want this election to be seen as an opportunity for us to take a different path, to put an end to the descent into the politics of division and the use of toxic language, and to reject those who are seeking to play on people's fears rather than to address them. The three core issues I've raised today have been building for some time, but they're all to a varying degree intertwined with what happens with Brexit. And on this, my position is clear. It must be the British people who get the final say through a public vote with Remain on the ballot paper. But the only way we can arrive at this point and then to campaign to Remain is if we get a government that's willing to do the right thing. So friends, this election is a defining moment. We must acknowledge everything that's at stake in London and then to act to ensure we take the right path. For this is about so much more than the economic impact of Brexit. It's about whether we choose to be a closed, insular and intolerant, or we choose to be open, outward-looking and inclusive. It's about defending our values of equality and fairness against the forces of the far right. It's about whether we get a government that wants to empower cities like London to tackle the big challenges we face, or one that wants to continue to hold us back. And it's about choosing what kind of government, economic system, and social contract we want for our children and for future generations to come. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadiq. I hope this is working. You can hear me okay. I'm Pippa Crerar. I'm political editor at the Daily Mirror. But some of you will know me better as former City Hall editor at the Evening Standard for many years, including the start of Sadiq's term. Now, we only have 10 minutes for questions, so I'm going to urge you, please, to keep them concise and to ask questions rather than making statements. I'll interrupt you if you don't. But I'd very quickly like to kick off with one myself, Sadiq. Sure. In these uncertain times, can you give Londoners the certainty of pledging to stay at City Hall for the full second term, should you be lucky enough to win the election? And have you even considered a third?
Well, yes, in relation to a full second. By the way, for those that think that mayors of London make great prime ministers, I mean, I'm serving a full second term.
So the full second term, and the third?
Third and fourth, fifth, sixth and seventh.
He's going to go on forever.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you could possibly put your hands in the air, and when you ask your question, if you could say who you are as well. The lady here in the red, and then we'll come to you, gentleman in the blue shirt at the back after.
There's a Chris de Burgh song there somewhere.
Lady in red.
My name is Claire Richards from not-for-profit Footwork. My interest is in seeing social principles underpin development. We heard from Ben about the concerned citizens of London, the low trust in developers and the development process despite our huge need for more housing. You have design advocates. I'm sure you agree we have to value our communities. Right. So how about community advocates, say one for each borough?
So we do. So what we've done is we've moved to a number of things that are getting Londoners more involved in development. So we, for example, have changed the rules in relation to estate regeneration. Before anybody wants to do a regeneration of an estate, if they want money from City Hall, they must ballot residents, and there must be a positive ballot in favour of estate regeneration. So we're democratising regeneration. We've set up public practice, which is experts going into councils with expertise in planning. That includes experts in consultation to make sure councils are better consulting local residents. We've now set up a situation where communities can let me know their views in relation to housing and other issues across London. And a representative, the chair of that group, now sits on Homes for Londoners with Liz, who spoke earlier on, myself and many others. We've got to understand that regeneration, gentrification means different things to different people. And Londoners mustn't be left behind by the regeneration of our city. And one of the ways to instill greater confidence in Londoners that progress is for them and we all benefit is to involve them in the decision making. So we're doing much more than ever done before across our London. The various platforms we have, from Talk London to the meetings we have, is to try and get Londoners' views heard in City Hall. Not just those Londoners who are already here, but also newer Londoners as well. So a month ago we opened up City Hall to Londoners, and they're Londoners, by the way, who are EU citizens, who are feeling currently very unwelcome, anxious, scared, have a real amount to offer to our city. And so we opened City Hall up and got them in. And we're also paying for outreach workers to go into communities and hear from communities what they want to see taking place. Really important. And one of the reasons why we're invested in cultural enterprise zones across London, we've got 6 so far, is to get communities involved in culture as well. Not just development, housing, but what sort of community do you want to live in, where people work, live, play, study. And the Draft London Plan this time has undertaken the biggest consultation ever during the writing of the Draft London Plan and during the public inspector stage as well. And we've got to carry on. I want Londoners to be citizens, not consumers.
Thanks, Sadiq. I'm also going to urge the Mayor to keep his answers concise as well,
Sure.
because then we'll get more in. So just before, if we just have the microphone.
It's a trick I learned from Boris Johnson, talk for 8 minutes and with some Latin words and Greek words and just, you know.
Just before this gentleman asks his question, if we could get another mic ready to another lady in red here. If you get another microphone ready, but yes, the gentleman here first, please.
Hi, Colin Wilson from Sadiq. Ben raised the issue of delivery of housing, and obviously infrastructure investment helps with the delivery of housing. Things like the Bakerloo line extension or Crossrail 2. With both Labour and Conservative seemingly committed to delivering infrastructure and kind of in many ways trying to outbid each other to what they can fund, I mean, given that the last London Mayor kind of brought forward the idea of, for instance, the Bakerloo line extension, I mean, who do you see would be offering the best, or what is the difference between the Conservative offer and the Labour offer in terms of investing in infrastructure in London?
Sure. Well, we play a game of bingo. How soon before someone from Southwark mentions Bakerloo line extension? And Colin, it was your second sentence you mentioned it, which is great. So Peter John will be very happy. Look, we've got to have the Bakerloo line extension. It will lead to a record number of homes and jobs in that part of London, benefiting Sadiq, Lewisham, in particular, but that whole southeast corridor. The good news, as you've said, is the Prime Minister's on record as supporting the Bakerloo line extension. But the even better news is we've had good meetings with Grant Shapps and government ministers who appear supportive of, at the very least, safeguarding those lines. Look, our city's grown. That's a good thing. It's growing because people want to come to live here, to study here, to work here. But we've got to plan for that growth. And that plan is going to be investment in infrastructure. Crossrail 1, Crossrail 2, South Bakerloo line extension, the tram in Sutton and Croydon, making sure that we have the soft infrastructure, schools, GP centres and stuff. We've got to invest in that. And that's one of the reasons why infrastructure is an investment, even if you've got to borrow to invest. And the other conversation we're having with the government is innovative ways of raising capital to spend on infrastructure. And the good news for us is the report done by the National Infrastructure Commission says investing in infrastructure in London is an investment in the nation. And it's really important that we realise that actually the country benefits when London does well.
Thank you. And just before this woman asks her question, is there somebody over here who'd like to ask one? So we can get the microphone ready. If you pass the mic back over. Yes, there's a woman in the 4th row here with her hand up. If you could get that microphone ready, please. And we'll come back to the woman up here, please, to ask your question.
Thank you. Jackie Peacock from Advice for Renters. Why should private tenants vote for you in the elections next year?
Well, Jackie, thanks for your question. We have more private renters than any time in our history. It's really important that they get better protection. So since I've become mayor, we've been lobbying successfully to end the fees that tenants pay to letting agents. We were told we wouldn't succeed. Lo and behold, we succeeded in lobbying. The government shows the lobbying power of the Mayor of London with people like you and others across London. We also lobby the government to end Section 71 no-fault evictions. The government's consulting that. We've got to keep on the pressure to end no-fault eviction. I've been in favour, and I've said this publicly, for rent controls in London. We're doing some really good work in relation to how that would work. And it basically means setting up a London commission that looks at what the rents are across London and then controls the rents in London. We've started more council homes than any time since 1984, important for renters. Started more genuinely affordable homes than any time since the powers had evolved to the mayor. We've also, most importantly, ditched the dodgy definition of what an affordable home is. According to the previous guy, it was a home that either cost 80% of market value to rent, or a home that cost £500,000 to buy. We've ditched that. We say it's one of three things: either a social rent home, council home, a home where you pay a London living rent a third of average earnings, not market value, or a home shared ownership part by par rent. So we've started to make progress to fix the housing crisis, but the reality is, even with a supportive government, it will take us some time to build the homes we need in London. That's why we've got to fix the rental market, and the best way to do that is rent control.
Thank you. And then I'm afraid this is going to be the last one, given the time.
I'm Joanna Chambers, Changing Cities. The recently published Inspector's report on the draft London plan has recommended a strategic review of the Greenbelt led by the Mayor. Is this an opportunity to really redefine the Greenbelt for the 21st century, to deliver improvements to the environment for the benefits of all London, as well as appropriately located housing?
Look, the Greenbelt means different things to different people. To some people, it means a good way of making massive profits on green land and building up very desirable homes. To some people, it means the lungs of our city at a time when we know the challenges of a climate emergency and climate change. I accept there are some portions of Greenbelt that aren't green for a start, but the plots, you can work around the plots and do something decent there as long as you replace the green space. The key thing for me is not to lose any green space in London, but to have more. So in London, I'm really proud that over the last 3 years, we haven't simply kept the green space we have, we've increased. We've planted in the first 3 years 170,000 trees, more than the last 8 years put together. We're planting more over the course of the next month. And we've got to protect the Greenbelt, in my view. I get very nervous when I hear some councils, some developers, and some think tanks saying building the Greenbelt. Once it's gone, it's gone. We could double the density of housing in London and still be less dense than Paris. And that's one of the reasons why the draft London plan talks about building on small sites, building on brownfield sites, building on ex-industrial land, mixed developments in relation to housing, going taller around transport hubs, using the benefit of public transport in London. So, I always get nervous when people talk about the Greenbelt because it depends how one defines the Greenbelt and what one's intention is. I think we can meet the needs of our city in relation to housing, the needs of our city going forward with the right policies, but we need the support of central government. We can't do it by ourselves. We're the most centralised democracy in the Western world. I get to spend, roughly speaking, with councils, 7% of the taxes raised here, New York 50%, Tokyo 70%. So tinkering around the edges won't lead to the transformative change we need. And, building the Greenbelt may appear attractive to some people, but to me it's a folly.
Before we let you escape, can I very quickly ask Ever the journalist, much of your speech was about Brexit, and of course London, almost 40% of London's population didn't vote for Brexit. You've become known as one of the big voices of Remain. How can you say that you're really representing all Londoners when it comes to Brexit?
Well, it's because I care about the 40% that didn't vote Remain, voted to leave, is to trust them to have another say. Look, the promises made 3.5 years ago are a million miles away from what's being given to us now. You can actually look at some of the promises made by prominent Brexiteers, from Boris Johnson to Michael Gove to Nigel Farage to Liam Fox. Compare and contrast what we have now. And even those 40% who voted to leave are now saying, whoa, this is not what we would. Nobody told us we'd have to face the consequences we're currently facing. Nobody said there would be these challenges and all the rest of it. And so what I'm saying is, look, trust the British public, trust Londoners. I can't think of anything more democratic than giving the British public a final say. It's not a situation of second, third, fourth referendum, never-endums. It's saying, look, now that we know the terms of exit, now that we know what it really means, not in abstract terms, not in terms of poetry, land of milk and honey, but what it really means, let us have the option of still choosing to leave the EU with the option of remaining. And if those who voted to leave still want to leave, of course they should vote to leave. If those who voted to leave now want to remain, they should vote to remain. But the only way the British public gets a final say, the only way we'll get a say in our future is if we have a government that trusts the British public to have the final say.
Okay, thank you. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, thank you very much.
Thanks.